And don't think that your works are going to get you anywhere, because it's not. It's all about faith. And this study of Galatians is going to take a load off of your backs. Do it because you think you need to do it. That's where legalism comes in. And that's what we're going to learn in Galatians, is how much legalism is still in us that we don't realize is there. Let's start out by an introduction, just because this is not normally where we would begin. We would start, say, in the New Testament Gospels. We would start in John. That's one of the books that people always revert to when learning about Yeshua. But there's a specific reason that I want to start in Galatians. First of all, it's pretty short. It's very easy to comprehend. But we see it today just as much as they saw it back then. And you need to be able to read the scriptures and say, how does this look in our context today? What is this to us? Is it just that Paul was writing to the churches of Galatia and that really we just need to learn what he said and not repeat some of the mistakes? Or are there greater messages, underlying messages? Well, if in one word, in Bereshit, in the very first word of the Old Testament, if we could find as much as we did to unpack in that one phrase, how much more do you think is available once the Spirit is revealed in the New Testament? Once the Old Testament is revealed? I want to say that we get stuck. I'm not going to need this. We get stuck on titles, if you didn't notice. Titles and who we are in the church. Well, who am I? What's my title? Does anyone know right offhand what apostle means without having to look it up? Well, it's a good try. Apostoleo, a sent one. That's it. It's that simple. You know who came up with the word apostle? The Romans. Do you know who came up with a lot of the terminology that we're going to read? The Romans. And we act like, well, God himself put this word out there so we could have this title on top of our heads and on our office doors and our parking spots. And don't you dare sit in the first lady's seat. How many of you have seen that? What do you think God would say? You know, that's exactly right. Very good. Yes. Those who want to be first will be last, and vice versa. So, Martin Luther, I know many of you know who that is, but what happened is along the way when the letters of the New Testament they were being written, you're going to see a map of that in just a minute. Everything was going great. They had their major highs and lows, because you imagine bringing a people group in. They don't really know your customs. They're pagans. Galatia was a pagan area, pagan nation. Do you remember the Gauls, the barbarians? That's who Galatia was made up of, the barbarians, really. And they wound up defeating Rome, there at the end, but for a while they came under Rome's power. But these guys were just I mean, they were barbaric, and they certainly didn't understand the law. But the law wasn't the law anymore. The law was freedom at that point in the Spirit. How do you teach that? So here's Paul, and the first thing that he does is explain who he is. But I find that over a period of time, this thing called the Catholic Church got involved around the late 280s. And have you ever had a rubber band that's real tight? Okay, so they took and they just did like that to the church. And bound the church so tight that all of that which they had learned was sucked right out of them, because they had to come under the rules and regulations of the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church. Exorcism ceased. The gifts of the spirits were the gifts of the Spirit was quenched. Everything was dictated by the leadership. And then around the 500s, you have Martin Luther. He says, I can't do this anymore. He breaks away because he finally reads and studies the Bible for himself. Can you believe that? For that period of time, they had blocked everyone except for the hierarchy. And they explained, and they still do it today, explained what the scriptures meant and said, we'll tell you what it means, and we'll read it at Mass, but that's really all you get. It's not in the pews. We'll explain it to you, you lay people. If you need an exorcism, you have to go through the proper channels to get one. It's still that way today. So the Spirit's quenched. But Martin Luther had beat himself up for so long. He was trying so hard. And he just couldn't do it anymore. He was almost dead. He was fasting, praying, reading, speaking, everything. He was trying to do it all because the church told him what to do. And then finally he got a hold of the Bible. He read the Bible and he said, wait a minute, there's grace. I don't have to live like this anymore. I don't have to beat myself up like this anymore. I don't have to live under condemnation for not being sufficient anymore. So he broke away. He goes to the Catholic Church, big bold move, and he puts the what on the door? 99 Thesis. Stabs it to the door and he says, I'm finished with this. Well, it did a lot of good, but then eventually he went off the rails, which is what you see with a lot of movements. But one thing that he did say about Galatians is that Galatians was his favorite letter from Paul, because he felt as though, like his wife, he was married to it. Why? Because it gave him peace from legalism. And sometimes we need to go back to those letters that give us peace. Not that the whole Bible can't, but sometimes you just need to read a letter. And that's what this is. An epistle is a letter that says, rest, my child. Be still and know that I am God. And for Luther, it's really hard to come away from that religious spirit and go into a place of freedom when you have been berated for what you haven't done, and you're never sufficient, right, Sandra? There's always don't speak, don't touch, don't look, don't. When really, by the Spirit's power, you have freedom. Does he give you freedom to sin? No. But if you're truly in Christ, you're not going to want to sin. He's going to remove that. He doesn't. You don't. And so what happened here is Luther found freedom, and he was like, I'll die for this freedom, like Paul. I'll be willing to die for this freedom. And that's what we find in Galatians. And Paul was so angry because he spent his entire life working for the zealous ones that made him kill the Christians. He was zealous for his faith. Can you imagine Paul, a big burly guy, with a hatchet or, his sword ready to just whack all the Christians. And then all of a sudden, he has this moment on the road to Damascus where this blinding light comes down, and Jesus Christ speaks to him and says, Paul, Paul, why are you persecuting me? Paul responds, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus. I am the Messiah. So he realizes that all his work has been in vain. It's like Aquinas when he died. Many of you don't know who that is, but it's a famous philosopher. All of his work, on his deathbed, he had a vision. Jesus came to him. And one of the last things Aquinas said, everything I've ever done is like straw. My life's work, I realize, is chaff. Well, that's what Paul said. He says, I realize that I now have to die for this cause because someone has died for me. And that's what Luther realized. And thankfully, we don't know, that maybe there would have been another Luther. But millions of people died as a result of that rebellion. I want you to understand that the way that was paved was in blood. And will be again. But Paul in Galatians, he proves himself. You find something about Galatians in all of the letters, because we don't write letters anymore. We write emails. And our salutations, our openings, it's like, hey, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. Or, hope the weather's great there. Or hope this letter finds you in good health and prospering, like in 1 John. But Paul, in this one, defends his apostolic authority. He opens it differently. He opens it with defense, not his thanksgiving like normal. So let's read this together. And I'm reading from the CSB, so if you want to pull it up from your phone, that's fine. I'm sorry it's a bit chilly in here. I turned it down to 72. So when Doug comes back in, I'll have him change it. I've got people with fans and sweaters. So you guys have to let me know. I'm a little chilly, but this because my endocrine system is undecided. Okay, we're starting in chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, an apostle, not from men or by man. This is a very important line because you will find the more you study Christianity that there are about 48 different denominations. And you'll find half of them say, average, half say that the gifts have ceased, they're not for today. The miraculous works of Jesus are not for today. Dreams are not for today. Exorcisms not for today. So you got that camp over here, okay? And then you got the camp over here that says, no, they are. We may not see as much of them. We really don't know why. We'll try to force some of it ourselves, some of them. You see a whole variety. But basically, it's divided into two. And then you got many different denominations within those two. This side over here says that Paul, only because he had that experience on the road to Damascus was he qualified to be an apostle. They say that you cannot be an apostle unless you saw alive in person Jesus Christ. Because in Acts chapter 1 and 2, they had gotten together and voted on the one that would fill the place. And when they cast lots, the one that would fill the place of Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, the one that would fill that place, their reasoning for doing and choosing as they did came down to the one who was, or ones who were with Jesus. And so we have a whole denomination just because of that decision. But Paul's different. And this is why. And I want you to understand, if you have loved ones or relatives that make this argument, use Paul. Because they cannot, they try to, but it's one of those, well, we just don't understand that. That's how they get out of it. Well, we just don't understand that. Well, there's a lot of stuff we don't understand, but this you can't refute. It's just like Deborah in the Old Testament. You can tell me I shouldn't be up here all day, but, Deborah, you got to get around that. We won't go into that topic. But Paul starts out defending his apostolic authority. Now, I want you to remember, for apostolic, I want you to replace it with his being sent out by God. He's a messenger of God. He's sent out by God. Sent one. Apostoleo. Sent one. Forget the title. He was having to show these people, no, I may not have been with the risen Lord, but I had this experience, and it qualifies me because I was chosen directly from God himself. It wasn't by man, it was by God himself. Well, that gives me a lot of comfort because, I go back, we always go back to our personal experiences. And, I've always been hammered for being a female and speaking. And I even had, back at the little radio station in Statesville, a death threat. It's crazy the way that people, they listen to every word you say and then they just come against you and just, but then some of them just love you and it makes up for the other ones. So it helps to see that there is a sent one from God, directly from God, and that's where he got his authority, because that's where mine came from. It didn't come from someone laying their hands on me, not to make light of that in any way, but no one laid their hands on me and said, you are here by commission to do this, this, and this. That didn't happen. It came directly from that visitation in 2002. So I identify with Paul. This argument that he was making. I'm like, he's my bro. You know what I mean? I dig him. Okay. You understand what I mean. You got me. Yeah. I feel me. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Like, somebody else. Yes, he gets it. And even though he's hard-lined, he's hard-nosed, look at his past. But he was not going to let anybody get past his boundary. He was on a mission. And it's just like when I met Doug. I said, listen, I am on a mission. And you can come along with that, but I am not diverting from that. I know what it is, and that has to be first. Understanding God's place is first. The ministry is after my husband. But you understand that commission, you have to stay focused. And I had someone come to me right before and say, and this is with every one of us, if God has given you a vision of something that you are commissioned to do, the enemy's going to do everything possible to steal that vision. And you'll hear that from Pastor Dave too. Their job is to put a diablos in your head. That's their job. They want to plant a diablos in your head and divert you from anything that has power in Jesus, especially the power of the cross. Amazing. So you stay focused, and he puts everything in place. And that's what he did for Paul. But Paul still had to defend to these churches. Well, why did he have to defend? He had to defend because he wasn't one of the chosen guys. He didn't have a seat. He didn't have a parking spot. He wasn't chosen like the other guys. So these guys coming against the churches in Galatia said, well, he's not one of the others. He's different. But actually, he was chosen. And he went through the process of letting these people know, will you turn the air down a good bit? I mean, up. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant up. Anyway, he says, so I, Paul, an apostle, not from men or by man, but by Jesus Christ, the Father who raised him from the dead. He's posturing. You notice that? Do you know what posturing is? If somebody says, well, I had a word from God. Well, that kind of puts you in a position like, well, either they didn't or they think they did, but some people will say, God said, and really he didn't say. It was more of a knowing, and you have to learn in your journey what the difference is in that. And that comes along, but you hear those people that always say, God said this, God said that, and you just got to let them learn. You got to let them learn. But in this case, Paul, absolutely, he had that experience. All right? He's writing to all the brothers. He's saying, and all the brothers with me. He's referring back to Acts, and he's talking about the brothers that were with him on his travels, his ventures. They weren't with him in this situation where he was writing this letter. He's writing to the churches of Galatia. I have a couple maps here that I want to show you. But before we get into that, he says, grace and peace. So this is kind of his salutation. Grace and peace to you from God the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself. Now think about it. He doesn't have to say this. He's saying this as a correction. It's like a Paulism. He says this correcting them without them realizing he's correcting them. Get it? As every one of you are looking up at the map. Okay. Grace and peace. So he's saying to them who gave himself for our sins to rescue us, key phrase, rescue us from this present evil age, according to the will of our Father. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. That part right there in and of itself is very important because he's refuting heresy without them realizing it. He already knows what the heresy is. He's just going ahead and writing it without saying you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. Paul was good about that. He just slid it in. This is the truth. I know what the lies are, so I'm just going to put the truth right in there, in that little pocket right there. In these maps, I want to show you this because this is something that people who have not necessarily studied their Bibles as far as the timelines are concerned, you're not going to get this. We get these letters, but when were they written? By whom and when? So let's just look at some of these letters here. Is my little thing dying? I know I've got a blue one. I've got a green one back here. I had a green one back here. Is the other one? Thank you, Shannon. Oh, a light. Okay, there you go. Which one is it? This one? This one? Oops.
Be careful.
Oh, which one is it?
The one, look. This one.
Oh, the middle. There, that middle one. Okay. Y'all didn't see that? Paul is here. Now, think about the zealousness of this guy versus the zealousness of us. All of us in the room combined. I want you to watch. Now, keep in mind, he didn't have a private jet. Not to say that's bad. I mean, if you're an evangelist, you're flying all over the world and you aren't using the church's money for your private jet and taking it from the little ladies. And I'm sorry. But I'm not against it, but it has to be done in the right way. Paul, right here, he is getting around. Okay, he's writing these letters. Now, right here is where John, on the island of Patmos, is writing Revelation. Right about here, they say about 33. Jesus was 33, and in about 33 AD, that's disputed, but somewhere in about here, Jesus has died. Do you realize he only had 3 years in his ministry, public ministry? All right, 3 years, public ministry, 3 years. But this is what I'm wanting to show you. Paul is writing in here, but during this time, he is traveling all over the place. Right here, death of Paul, Peter, and James, boom, right before the destruction of the temple. So let's see just how much Paul got around. Now, you talk about missionary. This guy went everywhere. He walked and he went by ship and motorcycle. There you go. Good. Y'all are paying attention. He went by ship and he walked in those sandals. Can you imagine all that dirt and dust? Oh, yeah. That's why they wash each other's feet. Hey, can I tell you something? This is something that the church, so many churches have gotten wrong. I got to tell you the symbolism, and I just want you to carry this on with you. I do believe that washing someone's feet can be an act of humility. We watched a wedding, and it was beautiful to see the husband and the wife wash each other's feet. But they were doing it because they thought that it was something that they had to do, because Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you don't belong to me. Does anyone know what that really means? And it's okay if you don't. And I don't want you to think, oh, I don't want to give the wrong answer. Sandra probably has the right answer because she's been schooled up one side and down the other. But if he doesn't wash your feet, you don't belong to him. Back in that culture, they wash each other's feet because their feet were dirty. It was a symbolic gesture. And what he was doing was speaking in a parable. Think about it. What shod with the gospel of peace in Ephesians chapter 6? Your feet. Your feet are shod. How many of you had horses? Horses are shod, right? Right. They're shod. And Jesus was saying through the Apostle Paul, when he wrote the book of Ephesians, which it was his most graduated letter, Your feet are shod with the gospel, the truth. You're planted firmly. So Jesus, if he doesn't wash your feet, it's baptizing you, it's regenerating you, it's cleansing you. That's the symbol of it. It doesn't mean we have to wash each other's feet, but it is an act of humility. And it's not like, God looks down on us, but don't do it because you think you need to do it. That's where legalism comes in, and that's what we're going to learn in Galatians, is how much legalism is still in us that we don't realize is there. Okay, this is a big map, and I know that we don't have time to cover all of this, but Paul had 3 journeys. And then, of course, his last journey was to Rome. But look how much he got around. Okay, so this blue here, this is his first journey. He went to, I think it was Upper Galatia, then Lower Galatia. First journey was Upper Galatia, second journey, Lower Galatia. And then his second journey, he's bebopping over here. Look how far he gets over here, right? And then in his third, now remember, they're almost shipwrecked on that one journey there at the end. And he goes, and then he goes back. And then he has time to spend in prison. And then, of course, his last journey here to Rome, when he was warned. See, he starts out down here. Look at all of this. Paul sent Rome an appeal to Caesar. He was bound and determined, and he made his way to where he would ultimately say goodbye. But that's just an example. This is a smaller example. This is just a second journey, and this is when he visited the churches of Lower Galatia. Let me expound further on sent one. There are those who are sent, and they are sent with a specific message. There are those who were sent as missionaries. And Susie said that an apostle plants churches. Well, that's kind of true today. We see that a lot today. They go and they plant a church, and then they go and plant another church. That's exactly what Paul did. But keep in mind, there weren't churches. So that's what he had to do. Now it's not that we should be planting as much as ripping up from the root and getting rid of that which defiles and doesn't belong, and planting that which is healthy, and then helping the ones that really want help. The flailing ones, the ones that are saying, help, I'm drowning, I really don't know what to do, I don't know how to fix it. Okay, so that's what Paul did. All right, now we see this second journey here, and he just goes all the way around Ephesus. This is where he's in prison. And there's just a lot that Paul did. So think about, as you're witnessing to other people, you have a man that historically it is proven he was a murderer. Okay? Remember Lee Strobel, the case for Christ? His wife was trying to minister to him, wanted to convert him, and he wasn't having it. He was a journalist. It's a great story. You look it up, you can read the book, you can watch a series of videos, but he set out to prove her wrong. And Jesus had a different plan. But when he got to the resurrection, he said that's what really blew his mind ultimately. And he wound up being converted, and now he speaks all over the world. But Lee Strobel started out making a case against Christianity. When you're talking to someone in regular conversation, you're not trying to beat them over the head with the Bible. But if the opportunity presents itself, say, what about Paul? Paul hated Christians. He killed Christians. And it took 17 years to fully get the legalism out of him. 17 years. He goes on to explain that, and we'll read that later. But it took 17 years to really get that legalism out of him. That's a long time. And even with a thorn in his side, a messenger from Satan to keep him from pride. And he gave his life with all of that, and having been the murderer of Christians, then gave his life for Christians. Something had to change. So when you're talking to people about the gospel, don't just slam it down their throat. Ask them questions. Or do like Jesus did. When they give you a response, you ask them a question. Fashionable style questions. It's thought-provoking. Instead of just shoving information down their throat, ask them questions. Like in classrooms, it's considered flipped learning. Now, this is the part that I had a dream about, and I saw thumbnails. And the thumbnails said, "Who has bewitched you?" And then there were other words from the Lord on those thumbnails. In verse 6, Paul says to the Galatians, "I am amazed." Now keep in mind, he was just there. But it's like he's having to go back to all these churches, write letters. He's getting words from people because you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have pagers and beepers. So you had to get a letter, and the courier would come and say, "Hey, this church is doing this church is doing that." And so he would respond with a letter of correction. Really, the majority of his letters was doctrine and correction. Doctrine, correction, and grace. The one who was so legalistic was the one so filled with grace. So he says, "I am amazed that you are so quickly turning away from him who called you by the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." Let's discuss the word gospel for a minute. When we think of the word gospel, it's natural for us in the West to think what? Right. The truth, good news. Who came up with that word? Rome. They had a gospel for the region. And you could either accept their gospel or not. Our Bible study is important. And you guys studying and then coming in here with questions after our teaching, that's important. Read the material for yourself and then come in and let's talk about it after we get to the close of the service. Gospel. We automatically associate gospel with Jesus Christ and the good news, not realizing from where that word originated. Jesus did not need to come, and I'm so glad that you guys don't have stones in your hands. Jesus did not need to come just to fix your sin problem, our sin problem. Please understand that. The God who is triune from infinity past did not suddenly have to just come and fix this thing called sin. Think way outside of the box. God created an extension of his life. Now, you are not God. I am not God. But we are partakers of the divine nature. Peter tells us that. We get stuck at sin. We get stuck, works, the sin problem, and our destructive cycles. what I am challenging you to do in your reading is to open your mind and understand that there's so much more. When you cut out all of that which we know to be witchcraft and you know it's not God, get rid of all that stuff, but really keep yourself open to the Holy Spirit living on the inside of you, revealing that which Jesus said, hey, you guys can't handle this right now. It's too much. To Jeremiah, he said, ask me to tell you mysteries, and I'll tell you mysteries. It's not a sin issue, and that's part of it. Yes, absolutely. But we make it everything. We do. It's here in the West. We make it everything. It's by His Spirit that we overcome the sin problem. We're always going to deal with it in this mortal body, but it's not the only reason Christ came. Let's step into the next reason. What is the next reason Jesus came for us? Okay, so all right, so we went over this before, just as a refresher, and I know you're probably just waiting on me to say it because you don't want to say it, but that's okay. Love, and when you love someone, you marry them. You create a family with them, usually, even if it's a fur baby. And so Jesus wanted, again, Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image to be like us. The fall is where we get stuck. But the plan all along was for us to live eternally, in eternity, with the Godhead. Follow me? Sin is a parasite. It's a speed bump on the way. It's not eternal. We get stuck on the speed bump. We get 1 foot off, and then we get right back on, and then 1 foot off. And it's this legalism in Galatians. And so he's telling the people from that area, why are you getting stuck back in this legalistic mindset? Because if you obey 1 dot and tittle of the law, you better obey all of it, because you have a choice to live under that curse or out from underneath it by the power of the Spirit. That's what he's saying to them. He said, there is no other truth, only the one I've taught you. And he starts to rebuke them. He says, you quickly turn to a different gospel. No, there is no other one. But there are some who are troubling you and want to distort the truth of Christ. Now, I'm going to put truth where gospel is. The truth of Christ. They want to distort it. What do they want to do? They want to come back and put legalistic restrictions on you. You need to do this, keep the Sabbath. Jesus is our Sabbath. You got to wear a prayer shawl. Let me ask you this. If we live under grace, does it do you any good other than to have warmth to wear that prayer shawl? Does it make you any holier? Think about it. To get dressed in all your regalia and have your little collar. Now, it does mark, hey, I am a priest if you're going into a hospital or something like that. But think about it, guys. That's why here we don't emphasize certain things that other churches have, because we don't want to put a burden on you. And we weren't even, at one point, we weren't even going to build a stage. It was going to be more of a circle so that everyone had equality. There is no one that is above you. Okay, we may make decisions, but everything is on our shoulders as far as the legalities here. But ultimately, it's on his shoulders. If he wants it to live, it lives. If he wants it to die, it dies. And that's the way all churches should be. But anyway, you have to understand that there's nothing that's going to make you holier. Now, there's things that are going to offend the devil. And that's holy water, anointing oil. They are detested by prayer shawls. Think about it. There are certain things that detest the devil, but it doesn't make you more holy in God's eyes. I want you guys to get all that out of your religiosity up here. Now, let's finish up with this. He goes on to tell them, listen, I don't care who comes to you, even if it's an angel from heaven, no other gospel should be preached to you, no other truth. Yes. But Paul has to get it across to these people. This is who I am. And I'm not here to persuade you. I'm here to tell you the truth, and that's it. You've got to be corrected. And then he goes on about the spiritual stuff. But see, if you don't make the correction, then all of the stuff that they've allowed in is going to stay there because you don't want to offend them. And then they're worse off than they were before. But if you're just honest with someone up front, verse 10, Paul says, for I am now trying to persuade people. For am I now trying to persuade people or God? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. You will not please people as a servant of Christ. And if you are out there ministering and you're trying to please them, you are not a servant of Christ. Is there a way to do it and do it tactfully and in love, but still be honest? Absolutely. Think about it. If you don't call out the sin, you're hurting them. So that's what Paul says. I'm not here to prove anything to you. I'm here to be honest. We had a gentleman come in, he visited us Sunday, and he said, I cannot find a church that will just be honest. That was the summation of what he said. He said, I find every church wants to please everyone out there. Instead of having, it's exactly right. He said, and it's the money. It's filling the seats. And if you don't make them happy, you don't get the money.